Three to order. Can clerk please call roll?
Chair Tanaka,
Here.
Councilmember Vinker,
Here.
Councilmember Lowing.
Here.
For the record, all present.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who want to speak?
No hands are raised at this time.
Okay, we'll close the public comment and then let's move to the first action item. For the first action item, Office of the City Auditor presentation of the utility work order process and control review report. Does the auditor have a presentation you'd like to review with us?
Yes, I do. Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. We have a report for the utility work order process. The manager on the audit that was conducted was Amanda Luzinski, but unfortunately, in the last couple of days, she lost a very close family member, and so she was unable to attend the meeting this evening. However, we have another individual who was working on that particular audit team. He is a manager with Baker Tilly, and his name is Ronald Centron, and he is going to provide us with an overview of the report.
Also, just because there's like three of us here, I think it would be good as you guys present for my colleagues for you guys to chime in if there's questions or comments versus waiting to the end. So feel free to just use your button here and ask questions. And that way we could keep the questions relevant to the slide that we're on. So why don't you guys go ahead?
Okay. Ronald, feel free to go ahead. You can advance the slide, man. Thank you. Next slide.
Sorry, of course, was on mute. Good evening, everyone. I was not the manager on this project, but I was involved. I did help Amanda along the way, so only glad to fill in for her. And then there was a project background. Can we go to the slide before, please? So, I mean, you guys know what an audit activity is, but the objectives of the audit were to determine whether adequate controls are in place and working effectively around the work order process. There were wastewater, gas, and water work order processes that we looked at, and also electric work order processes that we looked at, and those processes are a little bit different. So they had some different criteria that we'll get into here in a minute. We also wanted to assess the work order process and provide recommendations for improvement, of which we do have a few. And next slide, please, for the project background. And yes, as Mr. Tanaka indicated, please ask questions along the way. Otherwise, I'll just run through the whole thing, and there's time for questions at the end. But so for the sample work order testing, we chose 25 work orders between 2021 and 2022. It was like a 13-month sample, and the controls that we tested that were key to make sure that everything was operating as it should be are listed here. Supervisor approval, for instance. The permits must be reviewed and approved before they can begin. For customer orders, payment is expected to be received before any work can begin on those work orders. And another supervisory review, but there are a bunch of forms that need to come along with certain work orders, and so we check those for that as well. And for electric work orders, there's a checklist, and we actually found that process to be efficient or good at catching possible errors, et cetera. And so you'll see in one of the recommendations later that we recommend that process be brought over to the other work order processes as well. And we do have the the assets. We wanted to make sure that the capital assets were recorded correctly. We're being recorded in the books correctly. Next slide, please.
Actually, quick question on that slide. So are these in any priority order or just random order?
Just random order. They're about the same level of importance, slightly different, but yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. And then, so, the first finding here was that 3 didn't have the appropriate signature approval, and we recommend that, the signature approval be emphasized. And approvals should always be evidence in writing as well, just to make sure that that's occurring, that, no one work order can make it through the system without having been properly reviewed and approved by the appropriate personnel. The second observation had to do with also review of a completed work order, so a different part of the step, but also the review. We want to make sure that the work orders were carried through all the way that they were supposed to, the way that it was intended for them to pass through. And we recommend that the supervisor review the labor and materials, including third-party invoices. And there's a little bit more information on that in the report. It's basically, it should be evidence in writing as well. So next slide, please. So this is number 3 here is the one that I was mentioning before about the completed checklist. The electric work orders did have the checklist, and it was agreed to eventually with the team that it would be beneficial for the rest of the utilities, wastewater, gas, and water to implement a checklist of their own. A lot of the next ones, 4, 5, and 6, have to do with certain processes occurring quarterly, whereas accounting is doing things on a monthly basis. And so we recommend, I think 4, 5, and 6 is that these process. One of the recommendations overall is that each process be performed monthly to ensure that the books are as accurate as possible at any given time. And they did, I remember that were properly classified, and but not all costs were included, and so they were going to be included in the next quarter. And we recommend that it happen monthly to ensure, especially that depreciation be recorded as it should be. Next slide, please. This was the Sogen finding. As it indicates here, there's kind of there's a lot of duplication that occurs between Sogen, where work orders are kind of entered into and kind of tracked, to when they're into SAP. There's no direct, they don't talk to each other on the back end. And we all felt, and I believe the team felt as well, that exploring something like that would be beneficial. This may be the one also. Yeah, so they have handheld tablets in the field, but since they're not connected, and people are used to doing them on paper, and there's no real benefit to doing them on the tablet. We felt that if the process were solidified, that it could work better. And so one of the recommendations here is also that that they be linked, the handheld devices be have an active link to whatever is back at the home office, so that everything can be recorded in real time and in one place, and just to avoid duplication of efforts is really the summary of this finding here.
Excuse me, Chair Tanaka,
Yes.
or either of you, I have a procedural question. So at the back of our packet in Appendix E are these same key observations and recommendations that includes the management response. We're going to go through that later and then go through this all twice?
Yeah, actually, I actually think that's a really good point. Maybe what we should do is that way we're not switching context. I like the idea. So maybe what we should do is, rather than just talk about the problem and then we have to memorize all six, 7 things, and then it might be good to actually talk about how each of these weaknesses were addressed as you go through. I don't know if that throws you off from the presentation though.
Because I would note that just so far, the management response has been to agree with all of these. This is the first one where there's a partial agreement, and the relevance of that partial agreement, it's easier to keep in context. But
I think committee member Vinker makes a great point, and so I'd like to take her suggestion.
For just for purposes of keeping, I guess, the presentation brief, could we just pull that up possibly now? Is it possible just to pull up because I think the other ones are agree as well, perhaps, I'm not sure, but maybe we could just look at the ones where there's like additional context that would be helpful.
I think the other one, since there's agreed, so there's not too much contention there. Maybe you can bring up the staff response to 5, and we could talk about how areas of disagreement, and that way the committee members here can have that discussion.
Absolutely. That works.
What page is it?
25. Yeah,
One of the
Perfect.
challenges I would note is that they don't have the numbers in this exhibit E. But
Yeah, I don't know if you guys caught committee member Vinker's comment, but they're not mapped very well, right? So it's hard to know what is 5 on the slide and 5 in the
Yep.
spreadsheet here.
Definitely understood. I think it's not on this page. It's probably, or is it this one? Or there's the partially agree right there. So far they appear to be, are they in order? They may be, I'm not sure.
yeah,
There's but yeah, so there's the partially agree. And so if we could visit that. So settlement of work orders and reconciliation of construction in progress are done on a monthly basis. The reconciliation reports are saved on an at quarter.
where are you
Hold on.
reading now? Are you
This
going
is
with
a
the
different
partial
one.
agree?
Sorry, I'm on the 4th one there to partial agree. Yeah.
yeah.
So this is capitalized monthly?
So this is not the one that we were just looking at, is it? This is number 4. Yeah, so the one that we were just talking about was the Sojin. So that's 5. That's probably on the next page, on page 21. But there is a partially agree here on number 4 that we can address as well. So we recommended that the work orders be closed and capitalized monthly to prevent backlog and to ensure depreciation starts immediately when the asset is placed in service. And what we have in the findings is that the costs were capitalized, were historically being capitalized on a quarterly basis, not on a monthly basis. So I don't know, the action plan there seems the change may have been implemented somewhere in between. Because if it's occurring monthly now, but we have it as occurring quarterly, and I believe that was the main difference.
So this is Dave Yan, Utility Strategic Business Manager. So yeah, so we are working with accounting this, and we both agree that it should be continued quarterly, just as we don't have the resources to do it monthly. I think for utilities, we would basically be tripling the amount of work we're doing. I think it takes about 3 hours to do it every quarter.
Okay.
And then for
Mhm.
accounting, it takes about a week at least, about a week
Okay.
to do it for every fund.
Maybe before we get too deep on this, I don't know if my fellow committee members understand the extent of the problem that well, but I can use a bit more depth.
Sure.
So Sogen, is this for like residential tracking, like actually tracking the meters of like the water meter, the gas meter, electric meter? Is that what it's doing, or is Sogen for like something else?
Sorry, so Chair Tanaka, are we talking about the capitalization or the technology, the mobile?
I think we're talking about number 5 on the slide here.
Well, we had
Oh.
gone back to 4 because I had mistakenly said that 5 was the first one was partially agree.
sorry,
And they
okay.
correctly pointed out that 4 was
Okay,
the first
sorry,
partially
okay.
agrees. They're talking about quarterly versus monthly.
Go with one. You guys. let me
Okay,
know.
okay, let's go to 4 then. Let's go back to 4.
So,
Yeah, please continue.
and 4 is capitalization, just to confirm. So yeah, I think for us to do the capitalization, we do have to download multiple reports for all the 5 utilities we have, and then do a reconciliation between what we have in the system, and then also summarize everything against our CIP work orders. And then we send that information to accounting, and then they have to do some process on their end to do the capitalization. So I think for us, it takes about 3 hours every quarter to do this. But I think from what I heard from accounting, it could take anywhere from up to a week to do this process. So that's why we're not recommending quarterly or monthly at this time. We just
Okay.
don't have the staffing resources.
Okay.
So would it be
Makes sense.
correct then, the last sentence of the management response says, however, we recognize monthly capitalization is the best practice and will evaluate the feasibility of implementing the process. Should that be updated that you have evaluated it and it's too expensive or time consuming?
Yes, I would agree with that.
I think for
Auditors, what's the downside of having this less frequent process?
the downside of having a less frequent process is just not having depreciation on the books, as soon as it, when it begins to occur. Adrian, I'm not sure if you have, but that's basic. That's the gist of
Essentially, it
where
would mean
it's
that
coming from.
expenses are not current, other than on a quarterly basis.
Right, for financial reporting purposes, or at least tracking on the back end.
Exactly.
I don't know, I mean, to my fellow committee members, it doesn't sound that serious. I mean, it's.
I agree.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's not, it doesn't seem like to be a hemo control issue, but. Okay, should we talk about the next one then, 5?
Yes, please. And we may be able to stay on this slide here. So if we
Okay.
could just go to the next page here, see what that here, it probably, yeah, it's almost the exact same language off the slide that we have here. At least the observation is, or the recommendation.
Well, actually, sorry, this is the one I still didn't quite understand.
Right.
Maybe everyone else here is crystal clear, but not for me. So Solgen, is this
Which page are you on now, Greg?
slide?
We're
Page
on-
26.
Yeah, slide, we're on the packet page 26, the one that they have on the screen, and then we're on slide, there's no numbers on here, but we're on the 5 one
Yeah, okay,
on the slide.
okay.
And this is helpful. And I'm not sure if someone from utilities would, can provide Mr. Tanaka with a, what the Sogen is, but I mean, basically it's where we track like the work orders first get in, where they get, tracked throughout the work order. Is that correct?
Yes. So
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh.
Please.
Chair Tanaka, so this work order system that we're talking about, this is just one item of Sogen. So this just tracks the work order portion of
Okay.
whatever the work task is going to be, that it actually tracks that. And the auditor's recommendation is if we could find something that will be able to tie directly to SAP, then it would be real-time uploading from the field. But as you can see, if you go down a little bit further into this, we have difficulties from the utilities just because we got the 5 utilities. And we have not found a system yet that will track from water, gas, wastewater, and then from the electric side. Well, let's discount the fiber for right now, but those main. So as you can see here, back in 2019, we tried a different one. We used Sogen as a mobile application. It did not link to SAP. It didn't even link everything that we wanted it to do from a utilities perspective. Then we also went to smart energy again later in that period of time, trying to find something that would be able to track to SAP. So what we're trying to do is get all the work that we actually do and get it into SAP. So we have not found that system yet. And that's why we agree partially, but we would love to do that if we could find something, but we have not been able to find one system that fits everything that we have.
Does Solgen handle the like meter reading as well, or something different?
Total different,
Okay.
because again, meter reading, is you're just going out and read. So this is just the work that
Okay.
staff
The reason why I
performs.
was asking is like for myself, our house had a water leak. We didn't know about it. But for some reason, the city didn't read our meter for like 2-3 months. And by the time we read about it, we got a notice like, oh my God, you got this massive bill. And then I also saw someone else had the same issue where like for 5 months in a row, their meters were red. And then it just happened in January when the prices spiked. They got this massive bill, right? So that's why I was just trying to see if this was connected or not.
Is connected to the fix of the problem.
Mm.
So not the meter read, but when the person actually went out there to change your meter or where maybe they found something wrong with the meter.
Oh, no,
itself.
they just forgot to read it.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, then that wouldn't have created a work order
Okay.
then. But if you would have changed that meter
Oh, I
up, then
see.
that's what the Sogen would have done. It would have captured your address, what the work was done. And then we're hoping to get that in SAP, but it doesn't work today.
Yeah, the challenge right now is all these applications all best of breed for their specific utilities. It's hard to find one application that serves all for utilities. So we have tried asking each of these if they can add the other utilities on, whether or not they can integrate with SAP. And the general answer is no, or it's going to be very expensive. So we're still pursuing that. So with AMI now, we will be able to give out leak alerts as soon as that happens. So not through this mobile app or anything, but it'll be through the AMI network. And also through the AMI project, we are trying to test out a new handheld device for all the meter services. So they don't have to come back in and type twice of all the work orders. So we are testing new things out every year as they come up. So we do trying to want to reduce paper and reduce duplicate entry wherever possible.
Okay, I don't know, my colleagues have any thoughts, questions? Otherwise, because maybe what we could do is as we go through, we kind of close the door on it and we'll move on to the next one so that we finish.
Yeah.
But any concerns, comments, thoughts? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next one.
No, I mean, I think that response is totally, a totally adequate response to the situation. And, their response here demonstrates that they've taken our recommendation seriously. And so I think, it's a good outcome overall.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Should we go on to 6?
Yes, let's please go. We do have 6 through 8. They're pretty straightforward. I think we can stay on this document because I can just give you the background of what the observation was and we can touch on the recommendation. So if we could just move the packet page 27. Okay, and here's the rest of the history that utilities was just giving. Yep, that all looks.
Oh, maybe I just want to close one thread. So
Mhm.
I think you were talking about how the fact that some meters weren't read for a few months was fixed. So how was that fixed again?
I wasn't really talking about that meter read but issue that's, but we might have been doing some proration on that. Why we would have done that, I'd have to look into that for you and see why that was done. You should be out there reading every meter
Every month?
every month.
Okay. Okay.
In general, when we can't read meters, usually because of a lock gate issue and we don't have access to. the
I don't have a
meter.
lock gate, but
Right.
I'm not sure why. So we could look into why that happened. Usually there are notes when we skip a meter read or something. So.
okay. 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 Sorry, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, no problem. So number 6 here is the one with the design changes. We recommend that they be approved, and reading the the partially agree here as well seems very appropriate and logical to me as well. As indicated in the management responses, the changes are documented as redlined items. So that is typical in the industry. So but yeah, the issue here was just as it reads there in the recommendation was changes in the field can be issues and could impact areas that the crew may not be aware of, but how it's handled is explained here, and this seems like a satisfactory response to me as well.
So we've put a
So-
stop. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, please go ahead.
So we put a stopgap measure in this, and we agree now that what we've done is we are having the leads that are actually out in the field. So this is actually work that's being done that the engineers actually engineered, maybe a brand new service to a home. And maybe when they looked at it, they didn't really, when they engineered it, it looked good on paper, but when the field person went out, the source is actually on the opposite side of the house, or maybe it's in the middle of the house, or maybe the connections at the pole are too congested on this pole and they'll move it to this pole over here. So what they'll do is they'll redline that and show this new service line, maybe not on the left-hand side, but it'll be on the right-hand side. Now, in the past, what we did was we just redlined those and we just turned it into mapping and engineering. So this recommendation here was that the lead or that the engineer should come out in the field, see those red lines, sign off on that right then and there, to make sure that when the mapper actually gets it, that they actually see that change that happens. So this has been done. We are actually doing that now. So the lead or an engineer or a supervisor will go out there, initial off on this. So as it gets turned back into engineering, they'll update that drawing.
Yep.
So just to clarify, you have a lead who's doing it, but they're doing it in the field. And that wasn't their original recommendation, but you're explaining why that seems to be appropriate, and sound like Baker Tilly just now agreed that it was. So this last sentence, these minor changes to slightly move the alignment do not create any safety concerns. Baker Tilly concurs with that, correct? Because if
Correct.
so, I have no issues. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Sure.
So why is this a partial agree then? It seems like
think
I
we're also
had the
delegating-
same note.
Oh, they were also delegating to the lead. I think the audit, they recommended only the supervisor or the senior engineer signing off. But we're saying if it's in the field, we would like to also give the authority to the lead crew. So the engineer and this is the lead project.
so that's the only delta.
Yeah.
Okay, but all approvals are in writing.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that's important because I've talked to some folks about kind of like the permitting process. And one issue that people brought up to me was that what inspector you got, right? They wouldn't necessarily remember what the last guy did. So I think having a really good written record is kind of important. So people, like the plan check, you talk to one person says one thing, the other person says another thing. So, okay, so that you guys everything is in writing back in the system.
We've even taken it a step further that if the design was asked for the same service that was on the left-hand side, and they put it up as this left-hand side. In the past, we would just turn it back in and say it's good to go. But now we're actually having lead actually initial off on it. So that way that the engineer and the mapper know that it was put in just exactly the way they drew it. So we took it a step further than just infractions that we might want to make a move with, but now we also on the completion piece.
Okay.
So it's all in writing.
Ed, did you have something else on this?
No, I was gonna say, I thought it was more than this partial agreement as well, so I think we're in good shape.
Well, I understood the issue to be whether it's change in the field or change back in the office. And the concern was that people in the field might not have the full view, but by sending the leads out, is that? Because that to me is what they were addressing, because the response tends to say that the changes that are made in the field are small enough that it doesn't create a safety issue. So I didn't think it was a documentation issue, a scope of judgment being small enough that it could be done in the field as opposed to back in the office.
So the question comes up is how small,
Right.
What you think is might be smaller to me. So that's why we thought, and that we need to make sure that the lead, or if it's something major that's going to change, that we actually get the engineer to come back out there and actually work with the lead. The lead is always on the crew.
Okay.
So you have a crew and the lead is the person that's in charge. And so that's the person that will be signing, initialing off on whatever the drawing is or any of the changes that they do.
Okay. Yes, because they talk about that the leads are empowered to use independent judgment in the field for minor field changes that did not require engineering, such as moving the service alignment a couple of feet.
Right.
So I thought that was more what we're talking about, that we're designating a scope of judgment that's small enough that we're comfortable having it made in the field, and Baker Tilly is saying that that's okay. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And the remaining findings here, I do have a little background on the 7, 8, 9, but I think they are all agreed. So for this one here, the full system reconciliation comes from us having seen or it having been shared with us that when assets are added to the like the business analyst provides the accountant a report from the Sogen system, and so those costs are settled.
Can you point to the one you're talking about?
Yes, last one here on this page.
Okay, the last one. Okay.
Yes. So it was brought to our attention that likely the costs were not accurate in the past, and it's kind of like it's hard to get back into SAP to change those or track those. And so that's why we're recommending a reconciliation to begin with. And again, reading the action plan here, I think that's definitely going to addresses the concern that we had brought up. Sounds pretty straightforward. And also the documentation, the reconciliation, all of those things that we recommend are addressed in the management response. So we can move on to the next one.
Okay.
Unless there are any
No
questions,
issues,
of
guys?
course. Yeah.
Okay. Keep going.
Yes. This one is one of the quarterly basis, moving it to monthly so that and also that they be all be reviewed for accuracy by someone else, and the review should be evidence in writing, and that's just your standard reconciliation best practices recommendation there. And the management action plan also addresses this item. And if there, again, interrupt me with questions if anyone has any questions about anything, please. I'll move on to the next one. In the meantime, there are certain KPIs that are tracked for electric that utilities seem to be very pleased with and found to be very helpful. And so that one's just a straightforward recommendation. Well, if it's working over here, it would work for the other utilities, and it seems that we are in agreement with that recommendation as well.
I have a question on that one. You say that this will, the following KPIs by the end of the year. Which year? Some of these dates are listed as target dates. Some of them are listed as completion. And in this case, I don't know what year you're talking about.
Yeah, this one says 2022, but I would we did not meet that target date. We're now projecting it'll be done by the end of June of 23. So we've done parts of it, but we haven't completed yet.
It might be helpful to have a target date and a completion date. And then if the completion date isn't there yet, then you can just have a, estimated completion date.
So I apologize, but
I was gonna say, as this goes forward to council, it'll be easier to read that way, I think.
Sure. we can incorporate that. Yes.
I do think, and at that point in time, we could explain, I think it is for purposes of a complete audit report, having a target date that was not met is not a concern so much for this report as it is for when we conduct follow-up activities, right? So we'll have the target date somewhere, and when we come back and say, hey, how do all these recommendations go? Because that's part of the auditor's responsibilities. So at that point in time, we would be focusing on the target dates, et cetera. But for purposes of this report being complete, even though this hasn't occurred, I think this report was published a little while ago, or at least was shared with you guys a little while ago. So it's totally appropriate, but it's up to you guys if you need to change that. I just wanted to let you know that from the audit perspective, that's probably fine.
Chair Tanaka, I have a question for staff about this one. I'm just curious. So the recommendation being that these KPIs be developed for the electric utilities because it works so well for the others. Why weren't there any KPIs for the electric utility if there were for all the others? Do we know?
Well, usually it's separate in two separate groups. The water, gas, wastewater has their own analysts and project coordinators, and electric have their own. And since the electric side is so short-staffed, they don't have the bodies right now to run some reports and do some of this analysis. So whereas the water, gas is more fully staffed.
Do we know how long the water, gas and others have had KPIs?
Probably at least 6 to 8 years. I think also too is that what we found was that we did have some KPIs, but they didn't really tell us exactly what we were looking for. Water, gas, wastewater is a little more forward. If you look in the packet portion, you see some dashboards. So you see everything that's being measured on from a gas side. We did not have the analysts up till last year for on the electric side, and we're actually building those dashboards. And then we thought what we would do, these seem to be the most important things to look at here. If you look at the 5 that are down here. So, with the work orders, since we don't have this work order system in place, we're doing this all by hand. So we want to look at the maintenance work of how much maintenance work that we're getting done. So we wanted to look for more meaningful KPIs that actually could help the electric side. So new construction and CPI work, customer service work, the inspections. So we do have an inspection system, and then just any kind of emergency third-party damages and things like that. So we felt, and when we worked with Baker Tilly, we identified that these 5 should be the good starting point for us, and then we'll build those dashboards out a little bit further.
That makes good sense, but it sounds like, I think I heard you say you're doing it by hand. Does that go back to number 5 and SoGen system and all that?
Because you have got to remember
Or
that
different.
SoGen's
work
on the
order.
water, gas, wastewater. So right now what we do, it's actually, when we do a work order on the electric side, it's actually done by hand.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So
then you
part of
gotta
the
take
solve
that.
for number 5 would help you do this. That's my
Exactly.
point. So it'd be even more important to do number 5.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Helpful.
Great. And that is all for the findings. The next slide was questions or discussion. Looks like we got through any of those, but we're available for more if you need us.
Okay, so
I had one question on stuff that happened in the backslides there. You originally started with, I'm sure this is fine, but I just like can explain it. You started with sample size of 25 and you told us it was 90% confidence level and all the other good stuff about that. I can't find the page right now. Then you split that into 12 and 13. And so you must be comfortable that that's enough sample size to still have enough data to say that these are good findings. So just, packet page 11.
That is correct. Yes, we did. I mean, typically uncommon, I think, in situations like this, but there was actually a statistical sampling method that was used. So we took the entire population of all work orders, including the electric, wastewater, gas, and water. And so all of those together, we decided to, 25 is an appropriate sample size according to the sampling guidance. And then since electric work orders were pretty different in a few significant ways, we just made sure that we broke them out so that we would make sure that we touched on all of the different controls that applied to each one of the work orders, some of those being different between electric and the other ones.
I was just surprised it was so small, but since you were so specific about the confidence level and 0% expected deviation, I figured you would give us the same answer. I just wanted to audit the auditors there.
Of course, understood. We get that a lot.
Dang, I thought I was unique.
But that is all as far as what I had prepared for you all today.
And then I just will jump over to 67 if I still have the floor. Sorry if you wanted to. I just want to make sure I understood what that was on 67. The risk assessment results,
Okay.
packet page 67.
Oh, that's item 2.
I thought you said you were done. Okay, I'm jumping forward. Okay, thanks.
Anything else on this one?
No.
Okay, cool. Okay, great. So I have some more general questions. I guess first of all, if you were to compare kind of like the level of non-compliance on the items that you did sample compared to other organizations or other cities, how would you compare the rate of issues compared to what you normally see with other cities or other organizations?
I am not prepared to answer that as the the work order and utility piece. I'm not sure if Adrian, you have any insight there. I mean, it looks fine. Nothing to be too concerned about. Periodically that comes in and we kind of identify these issues that are where and they were picked up, but I don't know if there's more to that, it being the utilities industry.
I would not say that this was an alarming number of findings for this scope of work.
Okay.
Mhm.
Is this like exceptional, or is this like, how would you, I don't do this every day, so it's hard for me to know like how good or bad this is. So I was wondering if you could baseline it for me.
I would say would be typical.
Typical,
What
okay.
you find is as common, irrespective of the process, is that monitoring and the frequency by which that occurs gives you a greater level of confidence. So recommendations that would indicate monthly being the preferred time frame as opposed to quarterly relate to having the opportunity to be aware of anything that may be going awry more quickly than later on. And then the comments pertaining to dual verification in writing and individuals demonstrating that they have conducted independent reviews of certain approvals and processes are also typical controls that would be looked for.
And where the sampling, was it totally random?
Was the sampling random?
I believe so. I believe so. I had some background pulled up.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. When you're done, I can. Okay. So related to this or something else? No. Okay. So yeah, so I'll be curious to know it was random. Hopefully it is random. And then the second thing I want to ask you is, when I think about what are the risks involved with work order, I mean, I'm just trying to think what are the nefarious scenarios here, right? And a nefarious scenario would be somebody or ask for more work because they get a kickback, right? Now, of course, I'm sure that doesn't happen in our city, but how do we check for something like that, right? So let's say, for instance, we have this public safety building. It's hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Lots of money, and lots of work orders coming left and right. And how do we know that someone in the city says, oh, well, the contractor says they'll give me a trip to Hawaii if I give them extra work orders. How do we test for that? How do we check for that? Because that's what I'm thinking. This stuff here is kind of like small. It's like more like bookkeeping type stuff. And I'm thinking about like the thing things I think about, like what worries me about like work order is when people order more stuff that the city really doesn't need, or duplicate work orders, or stuff where they could get kickbacks, right? That's the thing I worry about. Or maybe it could be that's from the library side. The other side could be the contractors are unscrupulous, right? They say, oh, you got to dig the hole twice, right, or something like that, right? So because those are the big knobs I think about in terms of work order. So how do we and maybe we can't, but how do we catch that kind of stuff?
So as auditors, we're sort of required, right? We're abiding by the standards. We're required to keep the possibility of fraud in mind, like, at all times as we're developing these procedures. So they were, worked into there. And a lot of these controls, I think, say, the signatures, the different approvals, Those controls are meant to prevent that sort of thing. When we did look at, the transactions, for one of the findings, that the one that elicited the reconciliation process, with costs possibly being, recorded a little bit later than they should be, or potentially being inaccurate. The recommendation itself also kind of would hedge against it should identify any irregularities, right? But throughout the process, we're on the lookout for those types of things as well.
I mean, I guess, the one thing you didn't really ask about these work orders is, did the work have to get done, right? And that's kind of like the way you could check for some of the fraud, right? So like, if they said, oh, you need to string the cable from here to there, maybe one part of checking the work order would be, was the work actually required, right?
Yeah, and then also it's just, with the amount of work orders that are happening, I mean, the scope of the audit really was, the process of the work orders. We have to be careful with scope creep, which of course, again, fraud is, that's definitely a consideration in most things that we do, but we do have to be careful with scope creep because there are only so many resources, right? And then we'd spend time, trying to get all these details on something that, so it does have to be like organized and compartmentalized as it's being planned and executed. And so that would be one reason why we wouldn't do like, a detailed look into something like that unless we had come across some indicators during interviews or during the actual test work.
Well, I was just thinking you could, like, same thing you guys are doing, hopefully a random sample. You could do a random sample, like you don't have to do every contract, but maybe one or two contracts and just see, was that work actually required, right? Or are we digging the hole twice, right?
And I do want to clarify, and I knew this as I said it. So what we use is auditor judgment, which is, so when we looked at the sample, it's very likely that we did consider things such as, the amount of the work order, right? Because if we do a random sample and say, the average work order is under $100, but there are a few out there that are like $25,000, we want to make sure that we capture some of those $25,000 ones, right? So the sample, to correct earlier, I misspoke. It was not a random sample. It was a judgmental sample. And so these types of things, Chairman, are the things that we're on the lookout for, like throughout the entire process. So we did use auditor judgment, but the sample size itself was adequate, and we wanted to make sure we got a good representation of the different, scenarios that might be out there.
Okay, I still didn't understand your reason why didn't you check for the fact if the work had to be done? I don't think you have to do an every contract, but at least checking a few would to me seem prudent, right? Because that's when there's fraud or issues, that's usually what it is people double billing or triple billing, right?
I mean, yeah, so there are indicators throughout the process. The request comes in, people sign off on it. I think if we had come across one of the samples where, it was a super large amount and there was no approval on it and it was irregularities and stuff like that.
I don't think it'd be a large amount, probably a small amount that's kind of obscure. And
that is true.
Somebody done it like 2, 3, 4 times, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And we look for things like that as well, like, just under a certain amount of numbers. So those are considerations that we're used to incorporating, I guess, into the process.
Okay. It just seems like a bit of a weakness of the audit, but let my colleague go.
Thank you, Chair Tanaka. I have a narrow question, but I'm curious. I'm back on the KPIs. So the 5 that you mentioned here at the bottom, that Palo Alto is considering the maintenance work, new construction, customer service inspections, and emergency work / third-party damages, all makes good sense to me, but I'm not an expert. I was looking at Appendix D on page 24 of the packet, which is Baker Tilly's recommended KPIs for consideration. And they're largely the same. They're a little different. But I was intrigued and curious. The first 2, they separate out emergency work, talking about unplanned emergency work versus, and then just planned versus unplanned work. And I was wondering if just you could educate me, give me a couple examples of the difference. Like what is emergency work versus unplanned work? Because, and do we cover that in the 5 that we're proposing? So
Yeah, so like a planned work would be like a planned out or shutdown, because it would replace like a transformer or upgrade a pole. So that's a planned work. So we know we notify the customers in advance that we're going to take down the power for 8 hours, whatever it is. So that whereas the unplanned is like the storms recently, where the wind and the trees knocked down the poles and we had to go do emergency work there.
My question is that they distinguish emergency from unplanned.
Emergency from unplanned.
So they have the first category of KPIs is for emergency work, which is a measure of how much unplanned emergency work your maintenance department does. And then the next one is planned versus unplanned. And so I just was trying to figure out if unplanned and emergency are different. So maybe a question for Baker Tilly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks.
No, I think, well, can we pull up I actually have it here. Because I'm not too sure of the difference between the two either. I would have deferred to, utilities to see what the real difference is. So which one is missing, I guess, which of these, because, it sounds to me, or it looks to me like both planned, unplanned, or all of emergency work planned and unplanned are addressed. But not sure if that's correct. I would defer to utilities as to whether or not they feel it's being covered, like to answer your original question.
So are you saying to our utilities staff or your
Mhm.
colleagues?
Yes, I apologize. I can't, I didn't, I don't have the name of the gentleman who's been speaking on behalf of utilities.
So we have two gentlemen.
Well, like what Dean had mentioned earlier, we could have a plan to do something, but when we go on the field, and something could be different than what was in the design. I guess could be considered unplanned.
Okay, so I guess what I would suggest, what I'm getting at is I'm trying to figure out if we can reconcile the two lists, the Baker Tilly list and the City of Palo Alto list. And perhaps they already are, depending on how these definitions line up. So I was trying to get at what are these definitions? So I would suggest, I don't know what the right practice is, but if perhaps staff and Baker Tilly could put their heads together on these KPIs and maybe come up with some that we feel are appropriately comprehensive, that would be fabulous. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly willing to do any of that, and some of that has occurred, I think already, in just the provision of the management responses, and then kind of our accepting them. But I think that's a great idea. Yeah, we'd be more than willing to get together for any of that, should it be needed.
Okay. Anything else? No. Okay, so maybe so we have a motion here. So what I'd like to do is maybe I'll make the motion, and if someone's willing to second it, and I think both of my colleagues had some great suggestions, and maybe we could just put some of the suggestions onto the motion, and then we could prove and move on to the second item. Does that sound good? So I'd like to make the motion. The city auditor recommends that Policy and Services Committee take the following action, which is we're going to make a motion to review the utility work order, which we kind of did report, and corresponding recommendations for improvement, and recommend the city council accept the report. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, great. And I'd like to just tack on a couple things for maybe for future reports. And then maybe you guys could chime in and add some other ones. So one of them would be, I think it's important to have a random sample because that way there's no bias involved. So maybe everything that we said here, but maybe some sort of random sample. And then I think the second thing would be, I think it's important to check to see if the work actually had to be done, especially when we're doing a lot of capital improvement projects. And so I think that's kind of a key thing as well. So those are two that I have, but I would like to see if my colleagues have other suggestions.
I think those were good. Did you want to add yours, Vicky, that you just talked about?
Sure. I also kind of had a question. So we are accepting the report and what?
And make a recommendation for future, yeah. So, I mean, the
Future reports or future activity?
future audits, yeah.
Okay, so mine isn't so much for future audits. Mine was asking them to act.
Okay,
at
so
present, so it may be
let's
different.
add that in. I think I like your suggestions as well. So why don't you make some recommendations and the clerk will tack them on.
I guess we would ask that staff work with Baker Tilly to reconcile the KPIs indicated in item 9 of the recommendation or indicated in recommendation number 9. Yes.
So I'm just gonna call the response regarding the unplanned versus unplanned is unscheduled work, actually. So it's not an emergency, but something that came up last second.
Yeah, I thought it might be something like that, and I don't know how important it is, but it's number 2 on the Baker Tilly list, and I'm not sure it's covered in ours, so I would just ask that you put your heads together and discern some appropriate KPIs.
Okay, actually, I think the clerk will help on the
On
motion.
the language, okay,
Yeah,
sorry,
can
yes. Staff will work with Baker Tilly to reconcile the KPIs to be adopted. What? Yeah, under recommendation number 9, under is the right word. Better word. And consistent with or pursuant to recommendation 9. How's that? It's a lawyer talking. Yeah, sorry, I can't kick it. I have to, yeah, it's to be adopted pursuant to recommendation number 9. Apologies, Mahia.
Also, if you could tack my 2 on as well, that'd be awesome.
So pursuant to. And you can delete under recommendation 9. Thank you.
And then B, I guess B would be future audit work should really be random samples, and work orders should be we need to make sure we need to test to see if they were actually needed. And then
I think my only actual change.
give her a second, she's still typing.
Okay.
Okay, so future audit should be random samples, and we should test to see if work still needed to be, if work orders needed to be done. Because I think that's the biggest area of potential fraud. It needed to be done, or
No still in there.
yeah. Okay.
And I think the only one that was a change or an add that I brought up other than the questions were the issue of listing both target date and completion date of the current report and going forward.
I was just curious whether that's something we have to do or if that's just an administrative thing staff can just do. I mean, we don't need it as part of the motion.
Yes, definitely. I think usually what like the auditor mentioned, when we come back with updates, we do have a target date and a completed date as well.
No, but I
That's-
think what my fellow, I mean, I know what you're saying. Usually that's, but I think it's good to capture it because I've
Yeah,
seen
I
that
think
issue before.
this is value add from the committee too.
Yeah, I think I've seen this issue before, and it's something that when you said, oh yeah, that's a good point. I think it's okay. I mean, it's, yeah. Do you want to? It's a link.
And completion dates for each item.
So I just want a clarification that completion dates cannot be determined during the course of completing the audit report. Because if management has time going forward by which they're going to complete their remediation, we need to come back and conduct what's known as follow-up auditing
Okay.
to test whether or not it has been completed. So we can absolutely keep an inventory of all open items. And when we conduct follow-up, we can present that to you and let you know what those ultimate completion dates were in comparison to the target date.
I guess what I was trying to get was if it was targeted for, January of 22, and that probably should stay in there, even if it's going to go to, February of 23. Just so
Yes.
to see that, for whatever reason, there was a change in the target date.
Yes.
Does this language cover it, do we think? I think it is.
I think the only thing is there's some grammar issues on B. The future audit work should be random samples, and then there should be test. Yeah, okay. I think that's good. Any other edits? Otherwise, should we vote on this? Maybe the clerk could call the vote. Take the
I
vote.
guess I'm not quite sure of the implications of the the motion, how it's going to be carried forward. But the audit work should be random samples is probably not appropriate, just because there are always going to be situations where we're going to need to use judgment to make sure that we select appropriate, that we're looking at.
Okay, let's suggest future audit work should be random samples. Maybe would that be better? But
I mean, if Adrian's okay, then I'm okay with it. I just wanted to point that out.
I'm sorry, Chair, can you repeat the beginning of the
well,
sentence?
I guess is B fine the way it is? Is that something you guys can do? Because I think whenever random samples are nice because there's less bias, because sometimes there's selection bias when you're doing a sample, you kind of pick the good ones, right?
Well,
So-
you said you can.
We could
even-
include random samples, but we cannot exclusively only random sample because depending on the scope of the audit itself, it may require us to specifically look for certain criteria and conditions, and we would therefore omit those or overlook those if we were only random sample. So we may have to conduct statistical sampling, judgmental sampling, stop and go sampling, and random sampling as well. So there are 4 or 5 different types. And
Makes sense, actually. Yeah.
we would need to apply one or more of them depending on the nature of the scope of the engagement itself.
I mean, if you need Republicans with red hair, you can't random sample for that. You just got to find some of those to talk to. So.
Oh, so what would you suggest for B? Because I think you understand my point, which is
Yes, I do.
sorry,
So
what would
if you say here that it should include random samples, then we would not ever overlook random sampling as a technique to conduct the objectives.
okay. Okay, good. Okay, guys, anything else? Otherwise, maybe the clerk can call the vote.
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes.
Chair Tanaka.
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
motion passes.
And Chair, if I might just note, the question came up as to where that goes from here. And just to be clear, with a unanimous vote of the committee, this item will now be forwarded to the City Council on its consent calendar.
Okay, great.
Okay, great. Shall we go to item 2 now? Do my colleagues need a break before we go on to 2? No? Okay, let's go to 2 then.
If we can continue with the presentation?
That shouldn't be necessary because we went through all of the and then some. So we got the recommendations that we had on the presentation, and then we also got the management responses as well. So we did cover everything.
There's an item 2 on the overall presentation.
Oh, okay, cool.
That
Sorry,
pertains
my
to
bad.
task orders. Yes, no problem. Okay, this is a list of task orders that the city auditor is requesting approval from the committee. The first 2 tasks are new projects that need to be started. The citywide risk assessment will be conducted for the purpose of identifying risks at this particular point in time. This is typically an annual process and activity. And at the culmination of identifying those risks and rating those, we will then identify a recommended annual audit plan going forward for the new fiscal year. And so task 2 is the related activity that would result from conducting the risk assessment. The next 4 requests are for extensions of dates by which the original task order included dates where the audits would be concluded and also reported on. And we have exceeded those dates. And so we're requesting that the due dates be officially extended. The last 2 items, numbers 4.19 and 4.20, are new audits that need to be opened and conducted. 4.19 is disaster recovery preparedness, and that pertains to from the information technology and systems side, working certainly with the CIO. And the last item, 4.20, is a procurement audit in which we'd be working with the CFO's office.
Did you have anything else that you wanted to present?
No, that's it. That is
Okay.
the
Okay.
list for this fiscal year.
Okay, great. So do my colleagues have questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions?
I would just ask, what caused the need for extensions? Could vary by item.
There are a variety of items. So in terms of 4.12 and 4.13, We are waiting to update responses from management and also to review supplemental documentation being provided. And so we have extended the date for completing that report. Item 4.14 is a cybersecurity assessment report in which we have provided the report to management, and we're waiting for responses so that we may include their remediation efforts and then present that report to you. Item 4.15 is a report that actually needs to be written. That report was delayed. We had a bit of transition over the first quarter in the fiscal year. And so we are in the process now of completing the report. The field work has actually been completed.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Maybe I just want to piggyback on this question. So what was the root cause of all these extensions in general? Was it just personnel change? Was it delays from staff? Was it, what would you, if you were to try to root cause, because there's only, over almost half the task scores are delayed, right?
This particular set, correct. These are audits that they're started, I would say in the last half of the calendar year 2022.
Yeah.
And so in one case, we were waiting for additional information to be provided from bank, and that would be 4.12. Once we received that additional information, we then had to review that and update the reports accordingly. In the case of 4.13, we're waiting for
No, I get that. I guess what I'm just saying is if there was some sort of kind of common cause for half of the task to get delayed. I don't know if you could speak to that or because I heard what you said, but I didn't know the reasons behind that, right? Like, okay, the bank took a while to get back to us. Well,
I would say they are similar, just ensuring that we are working with management, we're receiving responses, and then we are analyzing those responses. And if there is any supplemental or subsequent information that needs to be received and considered, then that adds time to completing that audit process.
okay. I just want to make sure it's not like staff's taking too long to get back to you, or there's some other issue happening, right? That's what I'm trying to get at.
I would say more so reviewing supplemental information in these cases. Number 14, we've not received the first round of responses, so we're waiting for those.
Okay. Does staff have a response to the auditor's comments?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. There are a variety of circumstances, and in fact, on the cybersecurity, as an example, I know that our CIO is wrapping up the responses, and I should see those actually myself within this week, and we'll get those over to the auditor.
Thank you.
Are there related costs to this that are additional? Is that what? Or is it within the contract? Because you have a lot of numbers in here. Sorry?
These are all within the contract.
Okay, because you had a lot of pricing in here, was good detail.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So first I have to note, because of me, can't help it, that it appears that packet pages 33 and 34 are actually reversed and should be in the reverse order. I'm sure it's just a copying error. Because I think that attachment A comes, it's reversed front to back. So just clerical for the record. A question is, so on the two new items in 4, the 419, which is the disaster recovery preparedness, and 420, which is the procurement process review. What just for my edification, what is the genesis of new projects? From whom do they come? Is it and why are they added on?
These are added on because this is the time by which they can actually be executed from an annual audit plan. And so when we conduct a risk assessment, we project out the audits that should be scheduled in an order of prioritization. And so they will all be accomplished in the course of a full fiscal year. And these two happen to be the last 2 of potentially 3 that are in the list for FY23.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that's within your professional expertise as to when those are timely.
The timing, yes.
Yes, thank you. And specifically with respect to 419 disaster recovery, I assume, preparedness. It's just kind of interesting. I was hoping you could just elaborate a little because it talks about the preliminary audit objectives, including assessing the documentation. And it goes on and gives more detail about the documentation, as opposed to the disaster recovery plan itself, I think. So one, is that correct? And two, does the plan itself, is that who does that ever get audited? If so, who and when?
Absolutely, the plan does get audited. It gets audited from the standpoint of completeness. There are two phases to disaster recovery. One is from a systems perspective to ensure that systems are able to be failed over and in some cases redirected if we need to have backup situations in place. The other aspect of disaster recovery would be the business side, determining and identifying all of the systems within the organization from an operational standpoint and risk rating those systems to determine if we have a complete failure, what systems should be brought up first and which ones have a priority for risk to the organization if they're not restored. And so the scope of that audit will include reviewing those plans to ensure the plans exist, also assessing whether those plans have actually been tested. They should be tested on a periodic basis to ensure that they are current and that management knows how to respond in an instance of any type of service disruption. There is also an element if for some reason the city office building is not accessible, for example, how would operations continue and how would they be moved to a different location or whatever may need to happen based on the criticality of certain systems that need to occur on a day-to-day basis.
That is excellent and reassuring sitting in this building. But you said, and I just didn't quite catch, is that part of this 419 or is that a follow-on and separate item?
That would be within the scope to the extent that the timing and the budget will include all of those things. There are certain levels of depth that could be explored again, as we've talked about with even with this work order project. And so when we have our initial reviews with the IT department and the CIO, we will discuss the various aspects of what can be covered in a full scope and then determine the timing of the things that will be covered as well as the specific objective.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think that obviates one of my other questions, which is whether or not building security was included in one of these items, and it appears that it is. Chair Tanaka brought up with respect to the utilities, our last item, potential fraud and issues like that. That often comes up in the context of some of the waste hauling. We have a green waste contract here. Is analysis or auditing of that included anywhere in the this audit plan?
That would not typically be covered in disaster recovery.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have clarified. I wasn't still in 419. I mean, just generally within this audit. I'm backing up now to the overall audit plan.
That would be identified in the course of conducting a risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would have a number of audits that we would be recommending occur within the course of the upcoming year. So that could easily be one of those audits.
Okay, I see. Let me try to get that back to you, see if I've got it. So
Okay.
During the overall assessment under task 1, you would do various inquiries, which would include uncovering whether there would be a need for a more thorough audit of something like our green waste contract.
Exactly.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Last question is just ministerial. I was just confused at the top. I'm now on the front page of the staff report. And so maybe this is a question for Deputy City Manager Cotton Gaines, just ministerial. Under recommendation, it talks about the audit plan report, and I wasn't sure what that was. Down below under discussion, task 4, it talks about an audit plan. I don't know if there are two different things, and that is referenced as attachment B, but it says there's no attachment. So I just don't know. I'm not familiar enough yet with these documents to know if what the audit plan report is? Or if we have that?
Is that a reference to the current audit plan?
I don't know. That's what I'm asking. Okay,
I thought that may be a reference to the current audit plan so that everyone looking at the audits that we are discussing on a continuous basis can make reference to where we started at the
Okay.
beginning of the fiscal year to see all of the audits that are being covered.
do we have that in our packet? It's just for those of us who are getting used to this whole audit process and don't want to ask as many questions next year, I was just.
I think I mean, this is our duty is to ask questions, so
Yeah.
feel free.
But I don't see an attachment B. It says no attachments. So I'm,
To your point. Looks like I've got it on the linked HTML, but it may not have gotten into your packet.
okay. Then I can go download it later. I just couldn't find it and I couldn't figure it out. So, okay, so the audit plan report we do think is attachment B and we think it's online. So that is fine. I will go pursue it later. Those are all my questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anything? Okay. So yeah, to me, this looks like a reasonable list. You know, the one thing I wanted to find out on task 15 on 6 was does this also include, and I've talked about during council meetings, but you guys might not have watched it, but you know, at one point when our wastewater treatment plant was built and all the cities got together to split the cost, Palo Alto was bigger than relative to our other nearby cities. But over the past few decades, Palo Alto's kind of stayed the same size, and other cities like Mountain View and Menlo Park have grown. And so our share of the wastewater is much less now compared to our neighbors. So does this also about the split of the cost, especially the capital cost of our wastewater treatment plant?
Ronald, can you respond to that? That was another audit that you actually worked on.
I do apologize. Could you repeat that? What was the question?
Oh, okay. So I don't know if you've watched our council meetings in the past, but one of the things I brought up is, so when our wastewater treatment plant was being built and the cost was being split across all the different cities,
Mm-hmm.
Palo Alto was bigger relative to other cities, right? But what's happened is, Mountain View has grown up a lot. Like I think Mountain View is now the biggest user of the wastewater treatment plant. Menlo Park has gotten bigger. East Palo Alto, all the cities around us have gotten bigger, except for Palo Alto. Palo Alto's got a little bigger, but not that much bigger relative to our neighbors. And so the share of wastewater is actually less than it was before. I think at the peak we were like 40% of the usage, and now I think last I heard that we're down to like 32%. And so is this also talking about how we fairly split the capital cost among the cities so that we're paying our fair share instead of more than our fair share? Is that covered on item 6?
On item 6, I need to pull up item 6. But to answer your question, just from my recollection, I mean, yeah, that was I think it was definitely a focus of the audit. And if I recall correctly, there are provisions built into the contracts that allow for adjustments.
I think only on operating
in these
side,
cases.
not the capital side. At least that's what
I'm sorry?
Steph told me. I think only on the operating side, not the capital side.
That may be true. I feel like those contracts were very like detailed and sort of. I would be surprised if there's not a way to correct that. But then again, I mean, I haven't looked at them in a long time, so.
Well, this is one
whether it
reason
was
why I
a fair
voted no on the
share.
contract was because of that. It's just because I don't feel like we should pay more than we should. And so
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes total sense. I mean, contract, I mean, you guys could revisit that for sure. I don't think that we assessed necessarily whether or not it was fair at that point. It was more compliance with the terms of the contract at that time.
Okay. Well, it would be great if you could let me know. Because I think that's important, because it was a substantial, like 32% versus 40%. You think it's only 8%, but it's actually like 20%, right? Because 40% is 20% higher than 32%. So it's actually a lot of money, right?
For
And
sure.
we're spending like millions and millions of dollars on this. So
Yeah.
it's substantial. Okay. And to council member or committee member Vinker's question about how are items added. And I know my colleagues are kind of new to this, but the the audit reports to us. So some of the ideas should come from us, right? Us individually as a committee, as a council. So so if you haven't already, it's probably good to set up meetings with auditor and you could give ideas where there's potential risk or areas that you want investigated. But I think this is something that we do to make sure the city's protected. So feel free, to, if you have thoughts about risk or things like that, to communicate that directly to the auditor.
Absolutely. The list that is determined from the risk assessment is based on, as you mentioned, the interviews that we are conducting as well as information that we are reviewing. But we also set aside time for certain requests, such as anything that may become emergent throughout the course of the year. And if you bring that to our attention, we will certainly add that as well as prioritize it based on the need.
Yeah, and so if you have thoughts for other ones, or if you have other thoughts for ones in the future, certainly let the auditor know. And the audit in particular that I'm really interested in is the last one, the 4.2, the procurement process review. And so this is where a lot of money flows, right? And it's also a source of a lot of perhaps potential inefficiencies. So for me, kind of the things that I'm interested in is a couple of things, right? So one of them is how long it takes to procure, right? So like last night we had a contract for procuring lobbying service, and staff was saying, "Oh, it's going to take 9 months to procure." Like, oh my God, that's like an awful long time. So this procurement efficiencies is interesting, right? Like if it takes 9 months to get something procured, it just seems like a bit long. So just benchmarking that process to me would be interesting. Sorry, you gonna say something?
No, I just said, okay, we
Okay.
will.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that's also really important is because, if you look at the items that we're approving, most of them are, not just the rate of inflation anymore. They're double-digit increases in cost, and so, but sometimes you only see a single bid, right, which is really disappointing, right, because you don't have the competition. And so I think the other part of the procurement process would be just, why are we only getting single bids? Is it maybe the contractors are too busy, or maybe because we had at one point this was on the Ranger pipeline. You guys, this predates all you guys, so you guys may not remember this, but there's a Ranger pipeline project, which I think was a $6 or $7 million project to replace pipelines in our streets, and then we had one of the competitors of Ranger come to our city council meeting to complain because they said that I think the original bid had in there a provision that you had to work weekends and holidays and this and that, so really onerous terms, and so nobody bid on it. And because there was no bid, the city staff could do a direct award to a contractor, right? And so, what I wonder is, to avoid having to, or to have the ability to direct awards, do we put onerous things in there, right? Or onerous things in the contract that make it so that no one bids on a contract, so that we can do direct awards, right? And so I think about the bidding efficiency is actually really important, especially when we're talking about large multi-million-dollar contracts, right? And so that's kind of like the second area of interest I have, right? Is this in terms of bidding efficiency, and like sometimes Palo Alto has a reputation for being a very difficult city to work with, and we get the Palo Alto premium, right, so to speak, when people do work in our city, because it is a little bit harder and sometimes. And the last thing is, I wonder about, like for instance, our city, we had a CIO here at one point, and he was getting trips to Nice and Bali and all these exotic places, right? And I wonder how vendor dinners, vendor sponsored speak engagements to exotic locations and stuff like that, how does that affect the procurement process, right? And so I would love to see kind of this test for weaknesses in that process, right, to see how are we doing, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so I don't know if you could talk a little bit about what is your plan there?
We did not actually put any limitations on our objectives at this point. There are certain types, again, of inquiries and interviews that we want to conduct with staff, and then truly determine what the appropriate scope should be. But certainly, I've made note of the things you have mentioned, and so we
Yeah.
will be considering
Because
those.
the other thing that really bugs me a lot, and this is on the a lot of times on the consent calendar, is for me, we're presented with a price for the contract, but if it's not much of an increase versus last time, then a lot of times we were told in the staff report, it actually has the price of what the contract was last time.
Mhm.
But often when the price is like way higher, that number's not there. We have to go dig it up ourselves. We have to go through, you have to dig through years of reports or agendas, and it's crazy hard to do that. And so you don't have a baseline as to what is a good price because you don't know what it cost last time. And so for me, that's the other thing is like, I wonder, to make it easier for us as council members, I just wonder, is there also weakness in reporting to council, where it makes it easy for us to say, well, this is what we paid last time, this is what it cost this time, and so this is the percentage increase or decrease or whatever, or sometimes like there are multiple bids, but we're not told what the range of the bids were, right? We were like, you only know like this is the price, but we're not going to tell you the other ones. You have to kind of ask for it, right? And
So there may be certain criteria by which you would expect to have presented along with.
well, I mean, for us, a lot of us aren't in construction, so we don't know is $1 million a lot of money or not a lot of money. The only way we know it's a lot or not a lot is when it's relative to what it was last time, right? Or what it was relative to competitors or both. But when we're not given this kind of reference information, I think it's a weakness, because it makes it hard for council members to know, is this a lot or not a lot of money, right? Like I don't know how much it costs to pave a road, right? Like, it's maybe some of my colleagues are better at this kind of stuff than me, but I don't know. But to me, it would be good to have it straightforward where, last time it cost $100,000 to do 10 feet of road, right? And this time it's $11,000. Okay, great. We know it's a little bit more or a little bit less or whatever it is, right? But we're a lot of times we're missing this reference. So just I don't know. That's something which for me as a council member, when I'm trying to make sure that the constituents are getting value for the money, it makes it really hard for me to do that when these numbers are missing. So maybe that's something else as you guys do the procurement, because the whole procurement process ends with us on council looking at our consent item, and then we get these mega packets and numbers are buried in there, right? It's super hard. It's like really hard to know, are you getting a good deal or not? And so, kind of if in terms of your procurement process, you could kind of look at it end to end, I think would be really beneficial and may bring some efficiencies to the city. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, yeah. And so, kind of given my comments about the procurement process, is the budget you have for that, is that sufficient to kind of do a thorough job on the procurement?
I would like to look at that because it may not be sufficient,
Okay,
to be frank with you.
okay. So maybe then, if my colleagues are open to it, we could, I don't know if you guys have any questions, comments, thoughts, anything else you guys want to talk about? Otherwise, we could start going to motion.
Yeah, not on that. So go ahead.
Okay, so maybe we'll make a motion that to, well, actually, I made the motion last. Does anyone else want to make a motion?
You know what you want to say. Go ahead.
Okay, so make a motion that we approve the list of tasks 1 through 8 as proposed by the auditor, with maybe to give our auditor a chance to revisit whether there's enough budget to do item 8. Would that be good for you?
Yes, it would.
Okay. So maybe, I don't know if anyone would second it.
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any discussion on this item? Okay, should we call the vote then?
Yep.
Okay, clerk. Well, actually, maybe you have to write her first. Sorry.
Oh, that.
Let's give her a chance.
While she's doing that, I can say that for the record, I did find attachment B. It is on packet page 64, so it was here, both here and physically here in the printout I was given, so it's just, it wasn't, pardon me? It's the colorful page. Yeah, this is the first time I've worked on a paper packet. I normally work digitally. They're bookmarked. And so it was not, and apparently, yeah. Anyway, it is here.
Is the last ad there, Greg, thorough enough? I'm wondering if the word thorough enough should be in there. If there's sufficient budget for a thorough audit of procurement
Yeah,
process.
maybe the clerk could fix that. That's good catch.
That'll kind of set the table for what you have in mind. They're not just, because otherwise, why wouldn't you ask that about all these points, right? So
I think this,
where'd it go?
oh, it's at the top now. It's at the top. Second line. Do you see it?
Yeah,
Okay.
actually, he made the motion and I seconded. but
Yeah,
it
that's
doesn't-
true. Yeah. Okay, anything else on here that we should try to fix?
I don't have anything because I've been very impressed by the professionalism and knowledge of our auditors. It's my first interaction. So I trust that this list is sufficient.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm good.
Great job.
Okay, does the clerk want to call the vote or take the vote?
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes,
Chair Tanaka,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, I do have a
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
if there's something. So what I wanted to ask, and it might relate a little bit to your comment, is how what the process is for getting things on the agenda of PNS. I believe they're referred from full council.
That last night.
Well, yeah, but we didn't get to it. But is that the only way if something comes up mid-year? So for example, on that, so I'm just, I don't want to get too far into it. Our city attorney is.
Yeah, no, but we're talking about
But-
future meetings agenda, so this is a perfect time to talk about it.
Okay, because one of the things I think that we'll be considering is sending things about conduct of council meetings. And I think preparation of staff reports, they've asked for feedback several times, individually, but maybe if we could do that collectively in a body like this, it might help address some of the concerns you have as opposed to doing it through the audit. If we gave specific, requests and instructions through this body, it might be helpful for our collective efficiency.
I believe that topic is actually most closely aligned to your procedures and protocols handbook. And again, you'll be talking about the procedures version or a component of that. I believe it's March 20th. So that's coming up. Again, it's a full council discussion rather than from the committee.
was part of your question, the question of, can we get things on our own agenda? Was that contained in your question?
My question was twofold. That was the question because I think, I don't remember if the structure and content of staff reports was, if we got into that detail in the PNP handbook. But I thought it might help address Chair Tanaka's concerns.
I don't believe the document currently does, although we have periodically brought that up as a topic for discussion. Again, typically as a part of your annual retreat, where that could be a structured conversation with the council. I think getting back to your initial question, though, with respect to the items that come to the committee, I believe it is correct that those are referred either from the full council or brought forward from staff.
Thank you.
So I'll give you my perspective on this. It's I think it's important, especially as us as elected officials, we're accountable to the people, that we have some control over our own meetings. And over the years, I think it's been increasingly hard for us to actually control our own meetings, for us to get our items onto our own agenda. In the past, like at the retreats, you would like want to make a motion. Oh, I want to add this to the agenda, and we get on the agenda. It wasn't a big production. And increasingly, it's gone to you got to go through this colleagues memo process, which is much more of a production. Sometimes it could take 6 months or much longer to get onto the agenda. And I think that that we should make it a little bit easier than it is now, because the advantage of this kind of format is it's not as structured. We don't have to take turns. We can have more of a conversation versus just we're talking at each other on council, right? But with only three, if we could just talk when you want to talk, right? And so I actually think that just for efficiencies, we should try to handle some of the stuff that we can at this meeting, because we could work out the details much quicker with just 3 of us versus 7 people going. And so
That's the advantage of committees.
that's the advantage of the committees. Yeah, that's right. And so I think we should do that, just because how late do we want a council meetings to go, right? I think it's, if we want to conduct the city's business, I think we want to be able to move this here easy without a super big heavy lift. And I realize there's pushback from staff on this, but I think at the end we are accountable to the people, and so we should have control over our own meetings. I think that's important. So
Is there a way to streamline the speed of the colleagues memo, that once it's up and approved, that it has to come to us the next meeting or something like that?
yeah, I think that would be nice. So I think one chance we have is at the next time that the thing we pushed out last night comes to us, we could put that on agenda. So that's the one easy time. But all other times we have to do this colleagues memo thing, right? Which hasn't always been the case in the past, but it's now increasingly the case where we get significant staff pushback. We try to do something else, but I don't think that's in the interest of the people. I think that committees, council, commission, boards should have some control over their own agenda, not controlled by staff, because staff is not elected by the people. And so I think that's important.
Yeah, I think there's a difficult balance here, because the irony is that if we're trying to do things like ask for staff reports that give you your answers so the meetings move more quickly, if we want to do other things to make the meetings be more efficient, but if we can just pile anything on the agendas we want, they'll get long,
It is
and they may
balanced.
not be as thoughtful or well prepared, or staff won't have the time to research. So I'm not long enough in the tooth yet, to full 2 months in,
Sure.
to know where to strike that balance. But it does seem clear to me already there has to be some kind of balance.
Sure.
But yes, it would be nice to be able, for things that we feel strongly about, to have some mechanism other than annually to get them on the agenda
Yeah, I agree.
without a lengthy colleagues memo process.
There also could be not to get too complicated, but a weighting factor, A or B. Like A needs a colleagues memo because it's going to take staff time. It's going to take a while.
Yeah.
Versus B is, how come we haven't thought about that? Let's put that on the
And
agenda.
it applies to more than just policy and services, I think, in general, because in terms of the nimbleness of the city, because if everything is always controlled by staff, it takes the city council vote to get anything going. You can imagine there's a bit of a logjam, because we only have so much time at our meetings, and everything has to go through the city council before it could get on agenda. But staff could put it on there anytime they feel like it, right? And it's not, the power symmetry is not right to me, right? There should be a lot more control that elected officials or appointed officials have over the process than it is today. So
Again, to echo Councilmember Banker's point, we're 2 months into this, but there's also the normal request process.
sure.
Is we could say, hey, Mr. Shikata, what do you think about this? And we should talk about this.
Well, if he agrees with you, we'll get it on right away. But if he doesn't agree with you, then he's
So,
gonna
I
go
mean,
through
I don't know
hoops.
how often those conversations happen because I don't have any experience with it, but
Yeah.
That's a way to get something there, and particularly those things that are basically just going to be a committee discussion. And
Yeah, well, I mean, like
at this stage, you're not going to require staff time at all.
Yeah, but I'll give you an example. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, and I've been pushing for, but never really happened, is, it's happened on a limited factor, but I think, I view the city as a customer service organization. And what a lot of customer service organizations do is they get constant feedback. Like if you guys ever watch my office hours, a lot of them are about people complaining about development center. And so there's not, and one of the issues is that there's not feedback. There's not instant feedback. Like, how was the customer service? And so one of the things I've been pushing, and some of this has been done by the Art Center, and maybe there's some movement in this direction, but it's like net promoter scores. So it's very common. I just bought something from Amazon today. As soon as it arrived, they asked me, how was the service, right? So it's very common. You go to McDonald's, they ask you, how was the service, right? They also ask you right at the point of transaction. And for the city, we don't do that. We ask this once a year annual survey. And so that's something I wanted, but there's not necessarily alignment with staff on that. And so it's hard. You got to go through a process, right? And so I just feel that for efficiency of the city and for us to represent people, I think it can't be all controlled by staff in my mind. It's not right. But anyways, good question. Do you have any points?
No, not in general.
Okay. So one thing I forgot to do with you guys is I turn on my video on my iPad, but maybe you guys should turn on the video because I forgot that the auditor who's remote can't see you guys. They could kind of see, but it's not really a good view. And so yeah, there you go. And so I should have mentioned that earlier. So anyways, so the auditor now can meet our council member, and maybe if
Please, Chair.
yeah, and I should have mentioned that earlier, but I didn't want to interrupt the meeting, but maybe in the future we could try to do this so that when people are remote and also people, the public, they could see us, right?
Yeah, I tried to do it in the participants list. I couldn't do it.
Oh, yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, here it is.
Oh, sure.
It didn't.
Oh, what's going on?
That's why I
Okay.
need the IT department so often. See, it was just your finger was
There you
better.
go. Maybe you don't have good electromagnetic.
Yeah, there we go.
So it disappears, but if you touch this, it'll come back.
Okay.
You should need to take a sip of water.
Yeah, I was going to the participant list.
Okay, so I think we were about to adjourn, but I want to keep these meetings efficient and useful for my committee members. So any feedback, thoughts, suggestions of how we can do this meeting better? Any quick thoughts?
Not systemic yet, but I do appreciate the invitation.
Okay.
And I appreciate that when I made the suggestion at the beginning to move to the part that I thought was more efficient, that you were open to that and
Yeah.
supported that. So I think just things like that as we go, I now feel permission to bring up.
Absolutely.
And I will think about if there's any systemic things, but thank you.
Sure. Actually, and the reason why I liked what you suggested was because the context switching, right? If we had to look at 8 different items and if you just take turns randomly, it's like hard to keep the thread going.
Yeah, well, and not only that, you could tell which ones are more important because when there's agreement between the auditor and staff,
Yeah.
we don't have to be as concerned.
Yeah.
It's more when there's partial agreement. We didn't have any disagreement, that perhaps we should look more carefully at it. So
Sure.
that was actually my thinking was, it sort of was a cheat sheet to which we should focus on more.
Sure.
Yeah, that was a very good part of the actual packet. But then we didn't start the slides that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, where there was agreement and not, I think
Yeah.
that helped make it efficient.
Actually, that's a good point. Maybe if in the future, the slides could be arranged so that our meetings could be more efficient as well.
Yeah.
Like, so by context, so we have it all together versus bouncing back and forth.
Yeah.
But I think that in the past, we've always had this thing of stuff goes, then we ask questions and we kind of, bounce around between council members. But if we go towards trying to keep the context, right? So we handle item 1 or like whatever that, like, task 1, task 2, task 3. Then we keep the context in the thread. It's easier for us to have a conversation about it versus having to memorize what were the 8 things that you said and the 2 things you said. It's like you can't remember all of it. And so I think
Watch the video again, right?
you can watch the video again. Yeah. Okay, but yeah, keep the suggestions coming.
Yeah. And I think the thing for me, and I don't know what to do about this because it tends to work for most people, but I struggle with it, is that and I know staff spend a lot of time preparing the slides for the presentations that condense the presentation. But for me, it leaves me scrambling because I get all my notes on all my stuff and all of a sudden there's new stuff.
Yeah.
And it's mostly condensed, but sometimes there's updates, which are nice because they're updates. But honestly, I struggle with the slides. They add to my confusion because they're last minute and I'm trying to synthesize them in with stuff. I've already got, a page of notes, got an annotated thing, and now I've got a third thing.
Yeah, I have the same issue. Maybe
I struggle with it.
yeah, maybe when we do the slides or staff, whoever does the slides, they could think about how we do one part, make a decision, do one part, make a decision, so that we're not having to like, shuffle a bunch of papers all at once.
They're very well done, and I know you all spend a lot of time, and I feel
Yeah.
badly because I don't think they help me as much as you want to help me.
Yeah.
So I don't know what I'm asking you to do. I'm just sort of feeding that back so we can think about it collectively.
My only other point was that I was kind of surprised that this was only a one agenda.
Yeah.
One item agenda, because I know we've already been handed a bunch of stuff, so it must be backed up at staff, or we haven't decided entirely what's going to come to us, so.
There's a list of items that's on the work plan that we didn't get a chance to discuss
Yeah.
with the full council yesterday.
Yeah.
And we queue them up as the materials are mostly ready from staff. And so the audit reports, because we hadn't been able to bring them at the end of last year, you'll have more of those at the start of this year. And we're just bringing the rest of the items as they are prepared.
But
There are quite a few recommendation or referrals from council that we're having staff work on amidst the other projects they're assigned.
But you bring a good point up, because I was actually thinking maybe we should cancel this meeting because it was kind of a light thing. It takes us time to get here and staff to get here, and maybe, so that's something that we should probably think of as well, is, having efficient meetings. So there's enough there that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Although this one, even though it was lighter on the list, it's probably a good one to cut our teeth on. You have two new council members.
That's
It's the
what I was
first
thinking
time
too,
at This,
so.
so,
And
you
it-
know,
it's
I
very-
appreciated it. I
It's,
didn't know what room we were
it's
meeting
new
in.
material.
Yeah.
It's all new material, so
Yeah.
I think it was good to go ahead with this.
Okay, good. Okay, guys, I think we killed this one. Anything else we should talk about? Okay,
I just want to say I really appreciated the quality of the performance and the presentation from the auditors. It was really highly qualified. Obviously, folks, this isn't the first 3 times you've done this, so.
Thank you very much.
and also
it
if
was
you-
really good.
if you
Really
guys-
appreciate it.
if you guys haven't met the auditor, you guys, she should be scheduling time with you guys.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. I'm going to be reaching out to each of you individually to set up some recurring meetings.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay,
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 we'll call the meeting
Thank you.
adjourned. Thank you, guys.
thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.